Like many of you, I grew up hearing stories from President Thomas S. Monson about the work that he performed as a young bishop um, in the 1850s, and especially work that he did with what was often cited as 84 widows in his ward, a ward of 1,000 members. I've thought often about those stories, and my perception of it growing up. And now that I'm a single adult, having gone through divorce and now attending a family ward by myself, right, as a single dad and such, I got called to be the co-chair in my stake for the single adults, which will be an interesting adventure for me. So I've started really digging into the subject and to the idea of it and pondering. Um, to some degree, I volunteered myself for this job because or this calling because I saw a lack of activity and anything being done for people in that category. And I don't just mean activities and wards and stuff like that. I mean a lack of anything done to solve the issue of belonging. And I want to talk about a little bit about President Monson's experience first and foremost, because I think we have this weird perception in our minds about it. I don't think we clearly see it for what it was. So I think sometimes we have this strange perception, like these stories that he told of serving these widows, that I think we picture elderly women and rocking chairs and needing help because they don't have a man to anymore at their house and their children are grown and gone and so forth. But this is not the case. This is not what the stories and the context would tell us. He became bishop in 1950 at the age of like 22, which is crazy. World War II had just finished like 5 years earlier, and they had over 80 widows. This was not an old folks' home. This didn't have like a whole bunch of housing for old folks. These were normal, older, established neighborhoods full of families and people who were not sitting around in their 80s and their 70s. Many of these, probably the majority, would have been young mothers who lost their husbands in war or sickness or other things. I'm sure there were some older women involved, but if you read the stories, these weren't just elderly widows at the end of their life. Many were young single mothers in the prime of their life, single adults raising children alone because of war. That's an important context to think about. He didn't create a widow unit or a single adults ward. They didn't send them to a specialized congregation. He didn't segregate them for easier management. He ministered to them. He walked into their homes. He learned their names. He stayed with them. He served them. The stories provide the evidence themselves, as he would talk about serving their children and helping provide for their children in their times of need, in writing letters to their children who are serving in the military or on missions. You can go back and read the stories, and the context becomes clear in our minds that these were indeed the very single adults that I'm supposed to be serving. Suddenly, that feels a little bit more of an overwhelming task to me as I sit and think that context and how this amazing man went about serving those people. And I think a lot of times people in my callings, the habit or maybe the temptation is to make it to basically return it to a status of youthfulness. You know, we model young single adults towards. We try and recreate the kinds of things that they do, and it doesn't match most of the time. So I've been thinking about the two major reasons why these single adult wards exist, and I'm not saying that these wards shouldn't exist. I'm not saying that at all. They serve a population of people who clearly would like to attend something like that, but it does point out a couple of problems that we have in the church. I think we are unintentionally outsourcing ministry. Or what I always say, like, we have a problem of delegating the work of the Lord back to the Lord. Hey, Lord, I don't have a solve for this. I don't want to do the work, or I can't do it, or I feel helpless. Fix it. Create a ward for it. Create an organization for it. Create a manual for it. Create a video for it. Create something else. Like, you know what I mean? Like someone else should do it. Oh, I'll put your name on the prayer roll. Or, oh, hey, I'll pray for you. Do you feel the strength of my prayers? How many people actually pray anyway when they say that? Instead of us being actual ministers. And so we have a one problem, which is the lack of feeling of welcoming and belonging and of a place in our wards, in our home wards for people who are single adults. It's uncomfortable and it's hard and it's lonely. That's the first problem, and probably the biggest, most important problem. And instead of learning to solve it within our wards, we often delegate that off and say, hey, singles wards, you singles can go to this ward and that'll solve your problem. We don't know how to deal with it. We can't deal with it. And as members who are maybe in that position, rather than sitting with that and working with leaders and being vocal and saying, hey, this is like expressing our needs and talking about it and maybe helping each other in these circumstances within our wards, we move ourselves to these wards. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those words per se. They clearly have a place. There's leaders who have felt inspired enough to have created them. There isn't necessarily doctrinal support for it. That it's just an organizational thing we've done. And when that typically is the case, we typically over time see those things go away, and we tend to lean back into heavier into what doctrine and what actual the way the gospel is supposed to be lived. And to me, that's within our home wards. So while there is a role for single adult wards, and I'm not degrading those in any way that way. I just think it's maybe we've become uncomfortable with integrating people whose life stage doesn't match the majority of people, or that we don't understand. So sometimes I think we might solve relational complexity with organizational structure. And I'm sure, like, I participate in that myself, right? That's a realization that I think is hard to come to terms with. Now, again, I'm not trying to be accusatory in about how we approach this. I'm trying to be reflective and think about in a new context and a new light as I see the story of President Monson in a new light and understand what he was doing. Zion's not really built by sorting people into efficient groups and categories and tribes. It's the body of Christ is interdependent. It's not self sufficient. It's maybe self reliant, but that doesn't come without reliance on relationships or without the context of relationships. I just think that we need to understand that ministering is not an administrative thing, even though it has the word minister kind of mixed in there, and it sounds like an administrative thing. It's supposed to be spiritual. It's supposed to be about unity and the idea of the pure in heart of Zion. I think sometimes we delegate the work of God back to God. We pray for Him to fix loneliness, the loneliness He has commanded us to enter in and sit in with each other as the only way, really, that it disappears. The church creates the single adults ward for support and opportunity. I get that, and many people thrive in it. The structure is not evil. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that structure can't replace belonging. I can feel just as lonely in a single adult ward as I can in a home ward. I can feel just as belonging in a single adult ward as I can in a home ward. That's defensible, honestly. But I'm not trying to analyze the policy or speak to that. I'm trying to think of it from a real personal point of view, the gospel perspective, the spiritual in nature, and the nature of what we're supposed to be doing as ministers and what the work of the Lord actually is. I'm actually living this now. And the tension you feel between your personal needs and wants and the way it is, it's easy to want to solve it in other ways. Maybe not the best ways. When we've sat across from someone who feels like they don't belong anywhere, do you even know it? Do you know they feel that way? Whether they feel like they don't belong in their family ward, or they don't feel like or in a singles ward, or whatever it is, you start to realize that this isn't a theoretical thing. How many people do you know have left the church because they just didn't feel like they belonged? And that's not the gospel of Christ. There is a degree of not belonging. Sin, well, we are all sinful. Like deliberate choice of sin does not belong. It doesn't feel comfortable in it. And that's a thing. I get that. But feeling like you have no worth or no value or that you're less than is not what we want. So, looking back on President Monson, I think maybe the miracle wasn't that he visited all these widows and so forth. Maybe the miracle was that he refused to see them differently, to treat them differently. In fact, he maybe gave them more attention than others. I don't know. It's hard to know all the details and make those kind of conclusions, and I don't necessarily want to use that for my own argument. But I'm saying that maybe our models and approaches are wrong or need improving, or I don't know. But I don't think we're asking enough of those right questions. It's easier to delegate that work back out to an organization or to God and to not say, what can I do? And I think there are two reasons why single adult wards exist. One is to provide a place where people feel welcome and belong, because we don't do a good job of it in our own wards. That's something that's on us, on all of us, those who are in the category and those who are, outside that category, like the regular, married people and the leaders in the ward and other members of the ward. And then it's also partly the fault of those who can't seem to let ourselves belong because we are offended by everything that's said, because it doesn't make us feel warm and fuzzy, because we realize that some things in our life just aren't easy. All those widows in President Monson's ward, did they feel loved? Did they feel belonging? Did they feel like they were supported? I don't know. I'm sure they struggled in their own ways. All of them, in their own unique way, their own unique circumstances. I don't know. I think that we have misunderstood what belonging requires and how to help provide it. And I think we personally delegate what we're commanded to do ourselves. I been thinking a lot about this, and I think the second reason these single adult awards are created is for a place for people to meet each other. Because let's face it, meeting people that are single is hard today. You're busy. We're so busy. And because people are spread out, going to single wards here, or or in their own home ward here, and maybe there's one or two people in your ward, and there's not a lot of mixing and mingling. You and the world has become so separated while so interconnected that it's scary. And the dating apps are, oh, and everybody knows this. So there is a need to provide opportunities for singles to meet, to obtain some things that maybe they don't get as single people. Maybe the home ward isn't 100% able to provide, you know, but maybe there are some things we can do at a stake level or a larger level to provide some opportunities for people who are in a singles life, in a situation that is maybe different than the normal. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. So as I get into this new calling, kind of the way I think about it is, these are the two problems I need to try and fix or trying to address. One, how do we help people that live within their home wards feel more accepted, loved, supported, seen, love, like all of those things. How do we do that better? How do we teach ward leaders? How do we teach ward members to see and understand the context and their needs and provide what they can within that context? Second is, then how do we provide opportunities for people who are single to get to know each other, to meet each other, to maybe provide opportunities to build new relationships with each other and maybe new marriages? Those are going to be my focuses, I think. To talk with my co-chair, that's where my thoughts and my heart are. I think about this a lot, and I wonder, like, there's a lot of other things that we have to balance and consider in doing this kind of stuff that I think is really difficult. And the world today provides some extra challenges, and that we have to consider as we do this stuff. But at the same time, I think if we ground ourselves in the principle of ministering and the gospel and what Zion's supposed to be and what the work of the Lord actually is supposed to be, I think we'll be inspired and be led towards those things that we can indeed do to help solve these two things. I love it how life sometimes changes our perspective. Although sometimes that change and the changing of lenses is really hard to go through. Sometimes it requires great pain and grief and difficulty. But I am always appreciative of how it makes me feel and how it improves me in some way. The trick is now to not just feel it, not just to know it, but to go do something about it, to live. It's to actually take the talents, which includes knowledge and vision, and now invest that for a return for God. And not to bury that talent that I've been given now as a perspective. That's kind of feels like a heavy burden, but it's not my burden. It's God's burden. It's the burden of others. And that's what we've been asked to bear. And I think, as he says, his yoke is light. And trying to learn more and more, I think, of what that means. I think to myself, it doesn't feel light. Maybe that's because I'm actually not bearing his. Is that I'm always too focused on mine thinking that it's his, or wanting him to lighten mine, thinking that the version of bearing his yoke is him lightening mine. That's not what he said. He's told us to cast ours off and put his on. What does that look like, and how do we do that? I don't know. I don't know. I am a deeply flawed individual, and I definitely know I don't have the strength to bear my own burdens. And I think maybe the solution partly is to just quit trying. Sounds crazy, right? But to cast it off and indeed pick up his yoke, pick up the burdens of others around me, And in so doing, I'll gain strength and my own will feel lighter. I don't know. Do we actually ever really commit to doing that to a point where we know what that feels like? And then we can build trust and faith and hope. I don't know. I don't know is here today. I just thought this was an interesting thought as I've been thinking about my calling. Went to a meeting on Sunday, so I wrote up a summary of the meeting and kind of my thoughts on it, sent it to my stake leaders that um, and my co-chair. And as I was thinking through it, this this idea of President Monson and these serving these widows came to mind, and it just really struck me how I probably saw that wrong my whole life. And yeah, now I get to go to work, so and see what we can do. Anyway, hopefully this maybe sparks some ideas in your own mind about how we see these stories and how we see ourselves and the life and what we're supposed to be doing. And it's hard because it feels like, oh, I got so much going on in my life. I cannot pick up someone else's burdens. And I can't literally just drop all the things that I have to do. So what does that look like? I don't know. I don't know yet. Maybe that's part of the path that I'm on right now is to figure that out, to learn that, and maybe share it with you as I try and figure that out as well. But it must be possible. I feel it's possible. I feel drawn that way. So let's go drive. Anyway, hope you guys have a great day.